Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and our review of the USMNT's 2025 Gold Cup opener, a resounding 5-0 win over Trinidad and Tobago in San Jose. We're going to be looking back at this game, who played well, what it means for the US going forward, and much, much more. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, Power Trio time, Joe Lowery's here. Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm great. I mean, if the U.S. had just beaten Trinidad or just beaten Tobago, I would have been impressed. For them to beat both of them at the same time, I mean, that's just high-level stuff.
It's a twofer. It's very impressive indeed, Joe. Thank you for joining us. Also here, Graham Ruthven. Hi, Graham.
Hi, Ryan. How are you? Are you overwhelmed by Gold Cup and Club World Cup mania happening at the same time?
So many cups, so little time, Graham. That's all I have to say. It's that time of year where we've made a sort of dramatic shift from European soccer to soccer in the sunshine. Kind of here for it for those reasons, Graham.
It's weird vibes. Like, I've been watching a lot of the Club World Cup. I watched the US last night as well. Fortunately, otherwise this episode would be difficult for me. But watching the PSG Atleti game at the Rose Bowl in like midday sunshine, yeah, weird vibes where your brain goes pre-season friendly, but actually not pre-season friendly at all. There's $1 billion on the line for both those teams.
There are indeed. All right, we're going to get to a bit of Club World Cup on our bonus feed, by the way. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. If you'd like to join us there, it is the best way to support us. Bonus episodes where I say we're speaking about our first impressions of the Club World Cup and much more this week. Go join us over there. You'll also get bonus video content and, of course, access to our Discord server. Are all the cool kids hanging out over there? Yes, they are. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. A please and a thank you. And as a reminder, Graham's getting ready to vote because we are on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to like and subscribe, you can see us there indeed. All right, let's get to the USMNT Gold Cup action, shall we? The campaign for the 8th Gold Cup title for the US off to a flyer against TNT, who are, lest we remind you, dear listener, 84 places below the US in the FIFA rankings. In this 5-0 win, Malik Tillman with a brace. Then, of course, Big Pat Agyemang, Brendan Aronson and Haji Wright with the goals too. This was a process of exercising the demons against a team who kept the US out of the 2018 World Cup, of course. The US making hay in the bay, it seemed here. 70.5% possession for this game. Arguably could have been an even bigger scoreline as well. But Joe, obviously we can celebrate and bask in the glory of a 5-0 victory, but do we have to sort of have a caveat here that the opposition were not very good?
Yeah, 100% we do. This is a game where I think we learned just about as much as we learned from the Switzerland game. The score lines were at pretty much opposite ends of the spectrum, a 4-0 into a 5-0, flipping the scoreline along the way. But the United States didn't have to get out of first gear in this game. Now, to be clear, they took care of business in a way that they needed to take care of business, not just to squash the narrative beef that's happening around Christian Pulisic and Mauricio Pochettino and Tim Howard for some reason. But now we actually have the U.S. squashing some of the on-field narrative, which I think if we're talking about building excitement into a major tournament or building excitement even in this tournament, in the Gold Cup, all of those things are good and necessary. I'm going to be sort of the Debbie Downer, I think, though, throughout this episode, just like I was kind of the even keeler on the last U.S. show that we did, because that's just what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's your role, Joe. I don't disagree at all. My opinion on this team hasn't really changed after this performance. At the same time, it was a good performance by the US. They probably did a little bit more than they needed to do in this game by being so emphatic. And yes, the opposition were really, really poor. And Trinidad and Tobago, famously or infamously, have been difficult opponents for the US in the past, even going back to the Nations League in 2023, where the US get through in two legs, but they lose the away leg to Trinidad and Tobago. So historically, they have been a bit of a banana skin for the US, but this seems like a particularly poor Trinidad and Tobago team at no point in the match, maybe with the exception of a 15-minute period before the subs in the second half, did it really feel like they could hang with the US. But as you say, Joe, I think the real benefit from this result and performance is the kind of cathartic quality it had, because the last week to 10 days had been pretty damaging, had been pretty toxic for the US on and off the field. Of course, the US come into this game on the back of what I think it's fair to describe as a bit of a war of words through the media between Pulisic and Mauricio Pochettino, which is not ideal when you've got your captain and your manager exchanging remarks through the press. So the mood around the camp, or certainly from the outside looking in, didn't seem to be great coming into this game, and hopefully this will cleanse some of that away heading into the rest of the Gold Cup.
Indeed. Joe, before we let Debbie Downer take over on your part, let's maybe talk about some of the positives. Why don't we talk about some of the standout players, or maybe even the players we weren't expecting to see? Are there any of those? Josh Freese, I suppose, maybe in goal. Is there anyone else we want to highlight?
I like that Josh Sargent finally made his way into camp by inhabiting Matt Freese's body. That's sharp stuff. Honestly, Debbie Downer's not taking a break in this section because that's the whole thing. Basically, every U.S. player on the field was good in this game. You know, you look at some Patrick Agyemang chances that went awry, and you think, man, it would have been nice if one of those had hit the back of the net, and if his goal wasn't basically just Diego Luna's goal that got credited to him because it does take a wicked deflection off of Big Pat. But in this game, the U.S. looked good, and that's part of the problem. We talk about this a decent amount on, not the problem for the United States, to be clear, but part of the problem with trying to take meaningful things away from this game. We talk about this all the time on TSS. In these kinds of games against teams that you know you're better than, if you go out there and perform at that level, that is the expectation. It is not a surprise that the U.S. looked better than Trinidad and Tobago in this game, which makes it difficult to take big things away, or for me, honestly, to be really impressed by almost anybody that I saw. Was it fun to see Malik Tillman pull off a backheel flick to Pat Agyemang in the 4th minute of this game? You bet it was. Was it fun to see Jack McGlynn carve up Trinidad and Tobago with his left-footed distribution from the right wing? Yeah, I really do think so. I had a good time watching this game. I don't think I come away feeling different about many things. I do think there were some things we learned as far as Pochettino's lineup selection goes. Well, I think that this lineup is pretty much what Pochettino thinks is his best lineup for this, and we can get to that maybe at some point down the line. But a lot of players impressed in this game. The problem is they impressed against Trinidad and Tobago, which is just not something that I'm going to do a whole lot with.
I'll apologise to Matt Freese in goal. Josh Freese, of course, is the former drummer of the Foo Fighters, the session drummer, who I've obviously... They must be brothers. I assume that's what I've done there. So apologies. Shit, on the brain.
Well played.
Graham, let's come to you then. Any players you thought were standouts in this team? Anyone you want to highlight as a positive note? I mean, perhaps we could look at the forward line. The press was good in this game, right? Once again, discounting the opposition, but we had a good, strong press.
Yeah, and that's one of the positives that I'll take from this performance was I thought the aggression was good right from the start. We've seen games like this from the US historically, maybe not so much under Pochettino, where they have a talent advantage and they just kind of go through the motions and they're against a low block and there's not much pace to the performance. I thought there was good energy from the start in and out of possession from the US. Trinidad and Tobago, they couldn't really handle the press. They were pegged back inside their own half. As I said already, yes, they looked really bad. They couldn't get out. They didn't really have any threat on the break. They weren't organised at the back either. So it always felt like there was space for the US in pretty much every area and phase of the game. But I still give the US credit for the pace that they played at and some of their rotations as well. And there was real intent to their play. The difference in the pressing from the Switzerland game I thought was pretty stark, where, again, with the caveat of the opposition, but it felt like there was a lot more cohesion. Where, yes, Trinidad were extremely unpress resistant, but the US were backing up the first pressure and creating those pinch moments where they would collapse on an opponent, usually when they tried, Trinidad and Tobago tried to play into the middle. My only frustration with the first half performance was it felt like there was an opportunity to create even more damage. You could see that every single time Agyemang would hold it up or check inside. When he was able to do something with it, which certainly wasn't every single time, and maybe there's a discussion that we'll have a little bit later on in this episode about Patrick Agyemang, but when he was, there was so much space for the US to burst into in behind, and one pass and one run would have put them in behind, and maybe that's where an orthodox winger would have helped, because obviously it's Diego Luna on the left, it's Jack McGlynn on the right, who I found really interesting in this game. Obviously, some of his passing, it opened up some interesting angles for the US. His set-piece deliveries were good. Still not a winger, so you're not getting that kind of verticality from him in that moment. But honestly, that is a bit nitpicky because there were still a good number of openings where the US were able to get into open space. And as you said, Ryan, it was 5-0. It could have been more. There's a couple of golden opportunities, particularly Diego Luna being in behind in that first half, where he takes a little bit too long, tries to dink the goalkeeper. Maybe should have taken it a little bit earlier. So all in all, a good... I talked about after the Turkey game, the spirit of the performance, because I don't really know how much you can take from the mechanics and the positions and the lineups. I think the spirit, again, to go back to that line, was one of the most encouraging things from this game.
Yeah, it was indeed. Joe, why don't we have that conversation about the front line and maybe the number 9 position, Agyemang and Haji Wright up top for the US in this one. Did we learn anything about the number 9 position that we might carry forward beyond the Gold Cup?
I think we learned that Mauricio Pochettino sees Patrick Agyemang as his go-to 9, right? He starts this game, Haji Wright comes on for him later on in the second half, and we see Wright then up top as that lone 9. I think Agyemang did some solid things in this game, also had some challenges on the ball, which I think we've sort of come to expect from him in this position. I believe there's a moment in this game where he just like smacks the ball out of bounds. Classic. I do think we learn a bit more about Pochettino's pecking order. And actually, I pretty comprehensively disagree with Graham's point about we can learn more about the spirit of the U.S. from this game than we can learn things from the lineup and from the positioning. I think it's pretty easy to look spirited against Trinidad and Tobago. I think we learned some things from Pochettino's lineup selections here, and actually from where he positioned players. That we see Agyemang get the start over Brian White. I know Brian White started in that Switzerland game on Tuesday, but still, that we see Agyemang over any of the other options. And then that includes Haji Wright, who we see as a 9 in this game, which has not been a very common deployment for him with the U.S. men's national team over the last couple of years. I think that's telling of how much Mauricio Pochettino rates Patrick Agyemang, even if I think I do 100% agree with Graham that if we see him in a World Cup context, it's going to be as the snow globe option, which I love. I love that phrasing of just shaking that snow globe and seeing what Patrick Agyemang can do in a match. I think that's still probably going to be his role moving forward. But I think it's telling that he's the guy who gets minutes in the opening game of the Gold Cup, which is a tournament that Mauricio Pochettino seems to care about more than most other people. Maybe not with his overall squad selection for this competition, which he did use to send a message to players like Josh Sargent and Joe Scally, Tanner Testament maybe in that camp as well. But also when we think about it in terms of how Pochettino rotated ahead of these games, where it comes out in the media ahead of the Switzerland game, and we talked about it on that show, and says, I'm going to rotate my lineup. He called his shot, he took his shot, and he did brick his shot. But we did see every player for the U.S., every outfield player for the U.S., ahead of the Gold Cup. Pochettino wanted to make sure he gave everybody minutes so that by the time the tournament came around, the U.S. could look something close to whatever he thought their best is. So now we get through those games where everybody plays. This is Pochettino's team. I think this is the group that he really does value. I think that's telling when you look at someone like Agyemang getting the start up top, when you look at someone like Matt Freese getting the goalkeeper start over Matt Turner, where those guys split games in the friendlies, that it is Freese now who gets the start, and I don't see that changing, frankly. I could absolutely be wrong. But when the U.S. takes the field on Thursday, I really don't see that changing. That it's Max Arston again at left back over John Tolkien, I think is telling. It shows you how much Pochettino likes Max Arston. Now, I don't think this is totally the lineup that Pochettino will go with in every single game of the tournament. I think it was a more aggressive midfield pivot than we'll see at times. I think seeing Tim Ream in the back line is not going to be an evergreen thing for the U.S. at this competition. But I do think in most spots on the field, Graham, to me, this looks like Pochettino's 11 for this competition.
Yeah, totally. And what I meant by I don't feel like we learnt a lot about the lineup or the team on the pitch was we could have gone through this team after the Switzerland game. And in fact, we kind of did this towards the end of that episode. And one of our very thin silver linings from that game was it felt like we had a good idea of who Poch's 11 was. And honestly, this is not retrospective or anything. I could have gone through this team and I could have picked 10 out of the 11 that would have started. The one that I didn't get was Sebastian Berhalter. I thought that probably would have been Johnny coming into the central midfield alongside Luca De La Torre. Of course, Tyler Adams still being injured is the bit of the wild card there. If he's fit, then he starts. Berhalter was the only surprising one to me. And even in terms of the framework of this team, there are consistencies there. In the build-up, it was the 2-3-5 with Ream and Richards as the two building out from the back. Sometimes Alex Freeman would drop back to make it a 3 with Ream spreading left and Freeman spreading right. But by and large, it was those two. And then you had Berhalter and De La Torre where the midfielders coming deepest to get on the ball and take the possession off the toes of Ream and Richards. That then drew Trinidad and Tobago out to create some space in behind, which was one of the successes of the Turkey game, I felt. And then in the attack, it was pretty much, or I felt it was pretty much as it appeared on paper, with Luna left, McGlynn right. Sometimes McGlynn would cut inside, and you would have Freeman maybe push up a little bit higher. You had Tillman drifting throughout, although Luna did a fair amount of drifting as well, and then Agyemang as the focal point. Out of possession, I thought it was a little bit harder to get a sense of the setup because the US were so rarely in their shape without the ball, and when Trinidad were, on the odd occasion, able to create some trouble, it was on the break before the US could get set into that shape. But as far as I could tell, it was still the consistent 4-4-2 out of possession. So there are some That's one of the main things we've spoken about over the last few months is like framework, consistencies. What does Poch want from this team? And while it's been rough, and look, I'm not saying mission accomplished, we've done it, guys, congratulations after beating Trinidad and Tobago, we are starting to see some things become concrete with this team. So that is one of the positives.
Okay, you mentioned sort of the shape out of possession, Graham. How do you frame that going forward? Is that a sign of concern or no?
No, I think it works quite well, obviously, where you have Tillman pushing up and alongside Agyemang. I think Agyemang out of possession, I mean, that's where the first goal comes from, right? It's from Agyemang closing down Alvin Jones, winning the ball high up. By the way, Alvin Jones had an absolute nightmare of a match. I think that's karma for 2017, although I don't think that quite does it for Cueva. But yeah, he was very effective in that role, Agyemang. I think Tillman is energetic in that role as well. Obviously, there are big questions about the US, as we saw against Switzerland, although it was a different team. I kind of wish we'd seen this team against Switzerland, to be honest. I wish we'd seen the stronger team against the stronger opponent to give us a little bit more evidence of how the US would fare against that sort of team, even though Turkey are a decent team as well. But we still don't really have any evidence of how the US, with this team certainly, would face up against like a top 10 team in the world.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, much more about individual player performances, the team as a whole, the Poch project going forward, and much more. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to our review of the USMNT's 5-0 win over Trinidad and Tobago. Joe, I feel like we need to lay a few more flowers at the feet of Malik Tillman for this performance. Was he the standout? He was the standout, wasn't he, by far, I would say, in this lineup, and probably his best USMNT performance thus far.
Yeah, first goals for Malik Tillman, which kind of caught me off guard as far as the USMNT is concerned. But he scores a brace in this game. For me, it was a almost comprehensive performance from Malik Tillman. Graham, earlier you talked about his effectiveness defensively, which I think was the real standout from that Turkey game for Malik Tillman, where he wasn't quite as influential on the ball as even a Luna or an Arfston or a McGlynn in that Turkish friendly. In this game, I thought we saw a lot from Malik Tillman, which, again, shouldn't surprise, right? I think this should be more of the expectation. But I think it's worth noting, Pochettino raved about Malik Tillman post-game. Sanjay Sujanta-Kumar was in San Jose for us over at Backfield for this game. And I'm going to read a big chunk of this quote from Pochettino on Tillman that kind of just goes on and on and on and on. I think Malik is a talented player. It's obvious that everyone can see. Pochettino said, "What I changed, I think, of course, is I understand better him now," Pochettino said of Tillman. First few times, October, November, when we met for the first time, it was difficult to create this relationship that the player and the coach need to trust each other. This is about time. I think now, after a few weeks together, I really start to understand him, and he starts to understand us. He's very special talent, and very special kid. He's a fantastic kid. I think we are, like in PSV, we are in love with him. Pochettino loves Malik Tillman, and I love that quote. I think a lot of it's warranted, right? I mean, I do think Poch should probably pump the brakes a little bit after this game, but it's a quote that got me laughing a little bit, and I think it's a fair, generally speaking, a fair summary of how good Tillman was. Pochettino had Tillman back last fall, and we didn't really see this stuff, and part of it's because it wasn't Trinidad and Tobago. Part of it is because he wasn't a central figure in those U.S. teams either. But with the creativity that Tillman showed on the ball in this game, that's what's missing. You know, I talked in the Discord with some folks before the summer really started for the USMNT about why I wasn't all that optimistic that we were going to see the PSV version of Malik Tillman with the USMNT. And I think a lot of it's obvious. PSV are dominant in the league, and the USMNT are not dominant in anything that they do, generally speaking. So it is a very different context, and even more nuanced than that. Malik Tillman tends to thrive as an off-ball guy, where he crashes the box a ton, he puts up huge goal-scoring numbers, generally speaking, for a kind of a free 8, which is the role he plays for PSV. He puts up big goal-scoring numbers in the Dutch league, contributes a little bit in the Champions League, but he does a lot of that off the ball. And when I see things like the play I referenced earlier, that fourth-minute flick to Agyemang, that gets me juiced. Like, if Malik Tillman can add that sort of quality to his game more often, that is going to be what allows him to take the next step. Like, that's going to be what allows him, if a move happens this summer. AC Milan reportedly interested in Malik Tillman. If a move happens this summer, that's the kind of stuff he has to do more, because he has the frame, he has the physicality, he has all of those things, he has the work defensively, which was not always a part of his game, by the way. If he can add more on-ball threat in terms of his distribution and creativity, man, that's going to be huge. Like, that's going to catapult him into being the third starting midfielder for this U.S. group alongside Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams. So I think Poch was right to praise Tillman from this game. He was very good. I want to see this version of Malik Tillman in the knockout rounds of the Gold Cup.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a real impact on all areas of the game. He's one of the players that you look at in this US pool and think he could move the needle a little bit if he can find consistency and reach a higher level for the US. You talk about his creativity, Joe. You look at the numbers. He had 20 completed passes in the final third, which was the highest of any US player. Also made the most key passes. He created the joint most chances alongside Max Arfson and Jack McGlynn. And then his goal threat as well. His 2 goals come from really positive runs into the box to provide support. I know the second one is a tap-in, but nonetheless, there's still the intent and purpose to get forward and support Luna for that square ball. I actually thought the first goal was a really nice finish by Tillman, where he has to bring it down and shoot quickly under pressure from the goalkeeper, and even then he has the presence of mind to kind of screw the finish in at the near post. Whereas if he puts it back across goal, there's a good chance that gets blocked by someone on the line or by the goalkeeper. So we got all sides of his game, and again, the caveat: Trinidad and Tobago, not a very good opponent, but it was still very encouraging to see him put it all together in 90 minutes.
Yeah, and to lean more on that caveat, Graham, I mean, we had obviously Malik Tillman with a standout performance here, Diego Luna and Jack McGlynn as well also. And the whole front four, Patrick Agyemang we can include in there as well, getting the goal, which he definitely knew everything about. It's probably no coincidence that Trinidad and Tobago were, I'd say, ineffective in defence at best, to be generous, particularly in the second half where they seemed to mostly give up. It seemed like that Hadji Wright goal, I felt, and there was an Aronson chance late on as well, I felt like the defence were just not into it at that point at all. So Dwight York's got some work to do, that's for sure.
I think when you have a defence that for the second goal looks at an opposition player for at least a second and then still decides to pass the ball directly to that player.
That moment, Graham, was wild.
Like, so bizarre.
Truly wild. I don't understand what on earth is happening there. Like, Diego Luna is a short-ish kind of dude. He's not that short to blend in with the grass. Like I'm baffled, truly.
Yeah.
Maybe it was payback. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, you see those moments occasionally where the defender just, they haven't looked behind them or whatever. They play a blind pass back. But yeah, Alvin Jones is he's looking directly at Diego Luna, still decides to play the pass right at him. And then, Ryan, you're absolutely right. The last 2 goals, the Hadji Wright one and then the Brendan Aronson goal, which are pretty similar in the way that they so easily step inside off the left wing to get a shot away with the right foot. Hadji Wright's finish is a little bit more cultured than Brendan Aronson's, but nonetheless, a very similar goal. And at that point, it just felt like the US, whenever they got inside the box, we're gonna score. So that is the big caveat from this game. As we keep mentioning, I feel like it's important context. But yeah, that front four, I think there's a discussion around Agyemang where, I mean, look, we got the full Big Pat experience where this is what you get from Patrick Agyemang, where he is raw, his first touch is poor, downright bad at times. His execution inside the box is not great a lot of times as well, but he gives you a physical threat. And I saw Matt Doyle pointing this out on Blue Sky last night during the game. Like, he goes up against a central defender, they're in a game, and that does have some value for the US. His hold-up play is erratic. Like, at times it's good, at times he can get spun. Consistency is a problem for Agyemang, but I didn't really see anything from him in this performance. I know there seemed to be a lot of online narrative about Agyemang after this game and how he's not good enough to start for the US. That might still be true for him at a World Cup. I didn't really see anything that changed my opinion on him. This is what Patrick Agyemang is.
Well, and we saw Brian White in that game against Switzerland, and obviously Switzerland, I think we all agree, is a more difficult opponent than Turkey that Agyemang got his first start against so far this summer. But that we saw Brian White already, and Brian White didn't look great in that game either. I don't really blame Mauricio Pochettino for giving Pat Agyemang a real run out in this tournament. And I was really critical of Agyemang after that Turkey game where I don't think he was very good. And Graham, I think you were right to sort of refocus my expectations on Agyemang back to the player that he is at the moment. Let's not forget, this guy is still very new in general to professional soccer. Yes, he's 24 years old. He hasn't played a lot of minutes. And so I don't really mind Pochettino giving Agyemang a real run out in this tournament, even just as a developmental exercise, where his physical profile is unbelievable. And if he can develop some more on the ball throughout the next year, yeah, he does have a real shot to be that break glass in case of emergency, snug globe, whatever analogy you want to use. He's got a chance to be that player. Do I think that's going to happen? It might depend on how much Pochettino hates Josh Sargent, and so we can sort of wait and see on that one. But I mean, Brian White doesn't look like a game changer, and I don't think he meaningfully changes the US's attack in this game, which was already fine as it was. I don't think Damian Downs really changes anything. He didn't dress for this game, along with Adams, who's still dealing with that foot injury, and Johnny Cardoso, who we referenced earlier. I don't I honestly don't know why he doesn't dress in this game. So if I missed something, let us know. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. But that we see Agyemang here is completely fine with me. I think Graham, you summed up his game well. And I hope we see him continue to develop and work on those pretty obvious deficiencies and then become a little bit less of a liability in those ways so we can see his strengths really start to shine.
Yeah, Poch quite clearly likes him. Pretty much every time he's had the chance to use him, he has. So I don't expect that to change over the course of the tournament. I saw some takes after this game of like, oh, well, someone else will have to start as a centre forward after this game. I just don't see it. For the reasons that you said, Joe, like Brian White starts the last game, didn't really make up much of an impression. Damien Downs has had like 10 minutes over the course of 3 matches. So unless there's an injury, or maybe by the time hopefully the US win the next game and they can maybe rotate for the Haiti game to finish out the group. Maybe there's a bit of rotation there. But when it comes to the first choice, I think Big Pat's got this number 9 position nailed down for this tournament.
Well, you could argue, Graham, I mean, it's not even necessarily a case of breaking glass to release Agyemang on the international stage, because in international soccer, where it's a bit less cultured, arguably, a bit less drilled, the big man up top surely is a much bigger asset than in club soccer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have time to work on intricate attacking sequences, particularly when, as with the US for this tournament, they don't even have their first string, in a lot of cases their second string team. So a lot of these players are developing partnerships and understandings on the fly. And so it does help that you can kind of flip a ball into Patrick Agyemang and get him spun in behind when there's not really much else on. So I see Agyemang for what he is. I think there are positives to what he brings to the US, but I still believe he's probably like that third or fourth choice option if we're extrapolating out to the World Cup next year.
Yeah. Joe, moving back further back towards the back line of the team, well, the two in front of the defence, De La Torre and Berhalter, what did we make of their respective performances? I mean, we've mentioned Berhalter a bit already. Perhaps, did he make the weakest case to continue his national team journey out of this 11?
I don't... Maybe, yeah, kind of, sort of. I don't know. I have a hard time with that. I don't think Berhalter was great in this game. I thought he was fully capable on the ball. Some nice line-breaking passes, some good movement off the ball, which has been a real hallmark of his game this season with Vancouver. The thing with Berhalter that I didn't love at times in this game was I thought he was a little light in central midfield defensively. There's a moment in the 8th minute where he's a little bit slow and gets beaten. There's a 10th minute moment where he gets turned in midfield, and the U.S. clean it right up. And I don't think that's a game-changing moment, certainly. But against better opposition, I do worry a little bit about that, and we saw some of that in the Switzerland game on Tuesday. I don't think Berhalter covered himself in glory, but I certainly don't think he was bad in this game. It wasn't a performance that screamed he's not at the level. I think he absolutely was, and was a useful player here. I am not particularly high in general, and this is where I struggle. Like, even outside of this game, I'm not especially high on Sebastian Berhalter's USMNT future, because Tyler Adams and Johnny Cardoso both exist, and I do think Berhalter's best attribute is his ability to buzz around and be a real physical presence in central midfield. And I do think he can do other things as well. We see it on set pieces, some of his distribution, his movement that I mentioned already. He's a more attack-minded player than Cardoso or Adams. But I just don't quite see those strengths being enough to compensate for the fact that there are other players that can do the defensive work, a lot better than he can. And next time in this game, I thought De La Torre was fine. Like, perfectly serviceable, moved the ball well. I don't really have a ton of negative things to say about De La Torre. And really, my negative things for Berhalter are super nitpicky. I thought in general that the base of midfield for the U.S. in this game was strong.
Yeah, it was good, and the base of the midfield. Wait, I think I would maybe flip it, Joe, in terms of Berhalter and De La Torre. Not in a broad sense, just because I think I've made my feelings clear on De La Torre. I think his stock has already risen pretty dramatically over the last 3 games. But if you had told me before the game that the US would start this match with a good tempo and lots of possession and the rotations would be good, I would have said that De La Torre would have been the player to make the biggest difference there. But when the US scored the first goal, he had the third lowest touches and third lowest number of touches of any US player, ahead of only Matt Freese and Patrick Agyemang. And if you look at the full match as well, like, De La Torre did not, by his usual standards, if I go back and look at the game he played against Turkey, he wasn't, at least in terms of, I mean, this kind of, I'm not going fully on the statistics here. It kind of lined up with the eye test, because there was a moment in that first half where the commentator on the feed I was watching said De La Torre's name, and I went, oh, I've not actually seen a whole lot of Luca De La Torre in this match. And then so I went and checked the statistics, and lo and behold, he hadn't had a huge amount of influence. So, I thought Berhalter was a little bit more influential in possession. He had the most touches of any US midfielder, completed the most passes as well. Obviously, we know he has that sort of stuff in him playing for Sorensen's Vancouver this year. But I still felt like of the two, he was maybe a little bit more forthcoming in imposing himself. But I'd certainly agree on your take, Joe, that he's going to get squeezed out by the competition, and it feels like there is a more feasible, viable place for De La Torre in this team long term.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, Graham. I want to go back to another player who used to play center mid but was playing on the right in this game because we didn't hit him.
Let's do that.
Jack McGlynn, who I think is a fascinating player right now for the USMNT. Like, I am, of all the things that have surprised me most of the Pochettino tenure, that we've seen multiple games of Jack McGlynn playing as a wide, like, boots on the chalk right winger might be the most surprising. I know a lot of folks have talked about how he's playing on the right wing for Houston. He's really not. Like, he's very much playing as a right-sided attacking midfielder for the Houston Dynamo, who is much more central than he almost ever is as a wide attacker in possession. Like, that is Griffin Dorsey's right wing for the Dynamo. Jack McGlynn is not a winger. For Pochettino, in the last 2 games that Jack McGlynn has started, I should clarify, he's been a straight-up boots-on-the-chalk right winger. And in this game, it was kind of awesome. And in that game against Turkey, it was also kind of awesome and way more effective than I would have thought. McGlynn is, and part of the reason why this is so surprising is that I legitimately think, Graham, you could beat Jack McGlynn in a foot race. Like, that's why this is surprising, is because he has very little straight line speed. He is a lumbering, kind of languid midfielder, and that's why I've enjoyed him so long in central midfield, because I thought inevitably he would end up as a almost Busquets-esque deep-lying line splitter. But that's not his game. And he doesn't have maybe the physicality to thrive in that part of the field, although I'm certainly not giving up on that. Nor do I really think that right wing is his best position. But whether it's him cutting in on that left foot, which he can still do, even against better teams. We saw it against Turkey, where he scores that goal and then cuts in multiple times, just tossing up shot after shot in that game. Or in this game, where it was less about him cutting inside to shoot, although he does have that cut inside and shot that goes just to the right, his right of the post. But it was more about his distribution on the right side in this game, where he's got that great ball to Malik Tillman, who moves off the ball towards the right side in the 8th minute. He's got that lovely pass to Diego Luna, who I think maybe that's the sequence you were talking about earlier, Graham, where Luna doesn't take the shot quickly enough. That one's in the 25th minute. And it's just a dime after dime from Jack McGlynn on that right side. I want to see this more. I want to see it against other teams. I want to see it in the knockouts of this competition. I just didn't have this on my bingo card. And it has been not just fun, but I think legitimately effective so far.
He's making me, and it sounds like you as well, Joe, reconsider some things about Jack McGlynn in that position, because he ticks quite a lot of boxes for the US. I thought he was excellent in this match, because having his passing range on that right side really opens up some angles. We saw it with, it wasn't just that one chance for Diego Luna. I think he plays another one through to Tillman. I can't quite remember, but it was a repeatable thing for McGlynn to do that in the match, where he plays that diagonal ball from right to left. It's just a little bit of a different wrinkle for the US, where they have that angle. It's not a straight ball. I think even with Agyemang, it benefits him to have that little bit of angle on the passes coming into him. He had the most passes into the final third of any US player, Jack McGlynn, by quite some distance as well. I think he was up there into the double figures. So in terms of his entry balls into the final third, really effective stuff for the US. The other thing with McGlynn is his set pieces. And Alex Freeman, he has a kind of free header in the first half, which is straight at the goalkeeper, but it's a powerful enough header and it's a good chance for the US. That comes from a Jack McGlynn dead ball delivery. And that is such a valuable thing for the US, because if you don't have a 20-goal a season striker or established attacking sequences, or if you have a group of players that maybe there isn't the chemistry there, you're going to have to find goals from other areas, from other methods, and set pieces could be part of that solution. So I'm still not all the way there on Jack McGlynn as a winger. Like, he gives you so little in a defensive sense, and I still have doubts about whether you can feasibly, viably play him. I imagine this is Spain in a World Cup or France in a World Cup. Like, I just don't know if that's a viable solution for the US. But it's clear that Poch, he doesn't know what he wants on that side of the pitch, because it was Yunus Musa there for a few games. He's all running and ball carrying. Now he's using McGlynn there, and he's all passing range and long range shots. And doesn't do a whole lot of running. So there's not a huge amount of consistency there. But I am open to the idea. I want to see more. I want more evidence from McGlynn in that position.
Yeah, totally agree. And those concerns, Graham, that you raised are the 100% correct concerns. I'm not at all sure that it's going to work long term, but am I sure that I'm having a good time and that it works better than I thought it would? Yeah, that I am sure about. The set piece point you raised is excellent. I think the real takeaway for me on set pieces is that it just can't be Christian Pulisic anymore, man. Like, Pulisic has had some good set pieces over the years, but the difference between him and a number of other players in the U.S. pool seems to be really great, and it would not shock me if the U.S. gets some set piece revenue in this competition without their captain who continues to take those.
Very good stuff. Can we talk about the back line for a little bit as well, Graham? Obviously, the fullbacks are both very impressive with this one. I think we spoke about Max Arston and his quality in this. So of Freeman, Richards, Ream and Arston, are we presuming they're all key members of the squad next summer? Or not, maybe not key members, but members of the squad next summer?
Ream Richards, certainly so. I mean, we saw so little of Trinidad in an attacking sense in this game that I don't feel like I'm well placed after this match to make much of a judgment on the two of them. But in terms of their distribution, we already know that Ream is probably the best distributor out from the back for the US. Chris Richards is decent enough in that role as well. So I thought they got pass marks from this game, even if they were relatively untested. Max Arston, of those two fullbacks, Max Arston is probably the one I'm least sure of in terms of his World Cup chances, because he's very similar. The way I would assess him is very similar to the discussion we've just had about Jack McGlynn, where in games like this, you get the good side of Max Arston, kind of like we saw against Turkey, where he is high and wide and his role is basically an attacking one, and in this game he got forward well. Second most touches in the opposition box of any player, which is interesting, and that's kind of the Columbus Crew, Max Arston, that we see. I think I don't have it down in my notes, I'm afraid, but there's a I'm sure that he has a shooting opportunity at some point in this match from like a central position as well inside the box. So Poch is clearly, we talked about Poch maybe not grinding tape of his MLS guys in particular. Well, I think he's seen some of Max Arston, or someone has told him how Max Arston plays for the crew, because he has kind of been emboldened to do some of those things that he does at club level. I think Alex Freeman is the player that I'm highest on in terms of the two fullbacks with regards to his World Cup chances. I think he's a really interesting player. Similar to the Turkey game, I didn't think he was outstanding here, but he still manages to look like he belongs at this level. And his role was interesting in this game. I was keeping an eye on him for a lot of the match because he was in this sort of hybrid role where, as I mentioned earlier, there were times when he would be part of the back three in build-up, then other times he would be high and wide, other times he would be tucked into midfield with McGlynn keeping the width. There was a couple times when I was watching the build-out from the back, Alex Freeman was like a right-sided forward in those moments. Like, he's part of the forward line, so he's just a very interesting player that gives you a lot of different looks. And he's still, we talk about Patrick Agyemang not having a lot of minutes. Well, he's 4 years younger, Alex Freeman, and he's also midway through his first senior season. Or actually, Agyemang has had more than a full one senior season, so he's had even fewer minutes than Agyemang, and he just looks he's got incredible intelligence and flexibility even over the course of these games in this window. He's played in a number of different ways. So, look, we're a year out. A lot of things can change, but right now I probably would be taking him to the World Cup.
Yeah, I do want to see Freeman just once be freed to go and not have to be that stay-at-home fullback in those more established possession moments. And when Arston's in the team, we've seen it now in multiple games, it is clearly Arston who gets to go forward whenever he wants, and Freeman who sits back a little bit deeper, which is just not his role for Orlando at all. And I agree with you, Graham. I thought he acquitted himself quite well in this game for the most part. There's a 33rd minute where the cross that he plays into the box is a cutback sort of thing. I think it could have been on the floor, and instead he kind of puts it mid-height, and those are really difficult to deal with. There's a 58th minute sequence where he lets Tyrese Spicer past him defensively. Not an incredible moment, but I mean, other U.S. players had oopsies in this game too. It's not just Alex Freeman. Nobody put in a completely perfect showing, but I do think there are some things to tighten up at both ends for Freeman still, and that's not a huge surprise for those of us that have watched him in Orlando. But I do, and I said this after the Turkey game, I just want to see Freeman be free to go forward at least once in this competition. That's probably going to involve John Tolkien playing at left back, which at this point may just never happen.
You want to see some Freeman nominative determinism, as we call it, Joe. Let's take one more quick break. When we come back, more on this game and looking forward to the rest of the Gold Cup. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to our USMNT review of the 5-0 win over Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Joe, at the risk of evoking the spirit of Debbie Downer or Nancy Negative or whoever we want to say, for a performance like this, it was necessary, very necessary if you're Mauricio Pochettino, right? And very necessary in terms of spirit in the camp. But I just can't get over the fact that I wonder if you can actually learn anything from a game like this because of the opposition, and with all due respect to them. It felt at times like we've talked about a few passages of play in this game and some creative performances that I think would be stifled against a stronger opponent. So that's my concern here. And it felt a little bit at times like we were praising moments that you might have praised that you see in training. And once again, no disrespect intended to the opponent there, but as an exercise where we can learn about this team, I think it's quite limited. Would you agree, Joe?
Super flawed. 100% agree. I think there are things that we can learn. We talked about Pochettino's pecking order at a lot of positions. Graham ran through a big chunk of Pochettino's system, which I think is becoming clearer and clearer from one game to the next. We saw a lot of similar things with that back three and established possession moments that shifts into that 4-4-2 press at times in this game. There are things that we can take away as far as that stuff is concerned. I think the real positive here for the U.S. is often after these kinds of games, there is one player or there are a couple of players that just don't show up, right? That don't seem to be up to the level, especially in these kinds of Gold Cup moments where you're usually dipping down a little bit deeper into the player pool and there's somebody that you think, okay, yeah, we're probably done, right? And I think we saw that in the Switzerland game where the U.S. were not optimized for that game, and we saw what it looks like for Max Armstead against better teams defensively, and I frankly don't care to see that again. Or Nathan Harriel playing it right back in this game. I think we can move on from some of those things in those kinds of games. But as far as this showing goes, for the guys that I haven't already sort of mentally ruled out until they prove otherwise, I don't think we saw that. Like I don't think we saw Diego Luna just not show up, and all of a sudden you're thinking, man, well, can he really contribute to this U.S. team? I don't think we saw that for Malik Tillman or for Jack McGlynn. I think or for Alex Freeman. I think by and large for the players that I had looked at and that we talked about before this summer started as being guys who could potentially go and help the U.S. team, the full U.S. team, not the fake one sort of that we saw on Tuesday, but the full U.S. team when they reconvene in the fall and when they reconvene, more importantly, in the summer. I think we see those players playing up to the level and dominating in the games that they're supposed to dominate. And that is not a huge learning, but at the very least, we're learning that they're not ruling themselves out of that kind of contention for a U.S. team that very much needs to add talent, right? Since 2022, the U.S. team has not gotten better. It has been setback after setback, bad result after bad result by and large for the U.S. since that World Cup round of 16 loss to the Netherlands. And there are two ways to get better as a team, two main ways to get better as a team. One is for your existing players to get better. We haven't seen that. Another is for you to get more good players. And that is still the thing that we're waiting on, and it's taken a long time, and that's frustrating, and I think that should be frustrating for a lot of people out there. But it seems like we are seeing players put themselves in the conversation and not take themselves out of it in games like this. And that is certainly not a bad thing at the very least.
Yeah, the context that we are applying to this entire episode is trying to project forward if any of these players can carry this sort of performance into a stiffer test, into a sterner test. And there's precedent for it. We came out of the January camp saying that Diego Luna had been one of the standout players for that team. And now, I mean, Diego Luna at this point feels like the kind of beating heart of Pochettino's USMNT. I think he's, barring any injury or any complications, like he's going to start for the US at the World Cup next year. And that comes from a point of him impressing and catching the eye in meaningless games that they played in January. And we now have that opinion of Diego Luna because he's backed it up against better teams. And he's done it over a prolonged period of time. And he's done it in every single match. Like, I didn't think he was outstanding in this match, but again, he has an influence in this game. You look at his numbers; they're pretty strong. So he has established that his floor as a player for the US is higher than other players' floors in this team. And so you're trying to project forward. So yeah, fundamentally, we can't really learn anything from this match, but it could be a starting point for some players to back it up in a real way.
Yeah, definitely so. And obviously it's a starting point for the Gold Cup as a group stage. It'll be useful as well. I've got a game against Saudi Arabia coming up on Thursday and then Haiti following up on Sunday. So Graham, presumably these will be sterner tests. Saudi Arabia coming up on Thursday. They are going to be a better team than Trinidad and Tobago. Would you like to see anything different from the US, perhaps in terms of setup or personnel?
Well, you're right, Ryan. That is going to be a tougher test, particularly against Saudi Arabia. I didn't see any of their game against Haiti last night, so I'm a little bit ignorant on them right now. I'll look a little bit closer at Haiti once we get within the vicinity of that match. But I do know a little bit about Saudi Arabia. I did a newsletter about them a couple of weeks ago, and yes, this will be a tougher test that will be more competitive. At the same time, this isn't a good Saudi Arabia team by their usual standards. They have dropped into the fourth round of AFC qualifying for the World Cup. They sacked Roberto Mancini. They brought back Mr. Crisp White Shirt himself, Hervé Renard, for a second spell. And they're kind of stuck in... This is the macro stuff here, by the way. They're sort of stuck in between wanting to be a front foot attacking team, which is what Hervé Renard idealistically wants them to be, and then Mancini wanted them to be more of a kind of conservative, pragmatic side. So they've got a bit of an identity crisis. The micro analysis of this team is that they've split the difference between their first choice roster and a second or third string roster as well. So players like Dosari, Mohamed Kano aren't in this team, so that makes it difficult to assess, just as it will be difficult for them to assess what the US is going to throw at them. They maybe have a little bit more evidence, where obviously the US have things like the January camp to kind of have a second or third string team together. So it's difficult to know what to expect, and I think that is reflected in the fact that Hervé Renard has talked about how he wants Saudi Arabia to have more of the ball, and they had 71% possession against Australia a couple of weeks ago in World Cup qualifying. That was a crunch match that they ended up losing. They dropped into the fourth round of Asian qualifying. Last night, this Saudi Arabian team had the lesser possession share against Haiti. So I think the US are going to have to be prepared for both outcomes, where they have to, on one side of the scenario, they have to break down a low block. On the other side of the scenario, they have to play in quick transition. I don't really know what to expect from this Saudi Arabian team, but it will be, I think we can guarantee it will be a sterner test.
Joe, what about you? What are you expecting? What would you like to see from the next two group stage games?
I want to see a lot more of the guys that I really care about and care about seeing more of who can contribute. And there's players in that list that I've already named. I mean, I've already talked about all those guys. I want to see more of Luna and McGlynn and Tillman and Freeman. Really, those are the four players that I want to see more of moving forward. I don't think we're going to see all of those guys play 90 minutes on Thursday. I think that would be foolish when these guys have played a lot of games. They're going to play a lot more games this summer if things go well for the United States, and it seems like we're trending in that direction, certainly at a minimum now towards the knockout rounds. So I don't think Pochettino is going to run those players into the ground, but I do expect we'll see more of those players in various roles coming up on Thursday. And that is really the main thing for me, is I want to see those players come out and perform. I care way more about that than I do care about the team and their prospects this summer. I want to see the U.S. do well only in as much as it allows those players that I mentioned to go out and play against better teams. So that's the real thing that I'm curious about. One thing that I'm curious if we'll see more, whether that's on Thursday, whether that's against Haiti in the following group stage ender, whether that's in the knockouts, or maybe it's never at all. We've seen a back three from Pochettino in the second half in both of the last two games of the U.S. We saw it against Switzerland, where Tim Ream comes on at halftime and the U.S. are in this really more of a 5-3, 3-2 at times, although it shifted a little bit as the half wore on. And we saw it in this game, although later in the second half when Mark McKenzie comes on the field and he adds that third center back when he joins for Jack McGlynn. And all of a sudden, the U.S. are playing with Richards, Ream, and McKenzie, and two wingbacks now in Arfston and Freeman. We talked about the back three, and Taylor in particular talked about it quite a bit leading into this summer as maybe being something we could see for the U.S., where they're missing a lot of wingers, and there really aren't any true wingers, although that was before Jack McGlynn was converted by Mauricio Pochettino. But really, I'm curious if we're going to see a bit more of that. Where against Switzerland, I thought it was we need to stop the bleeding. We're getting booed at halftime in Nashville, of all places. In this game, the U.S. didn't need that third center back. So it could be a minutes thing. It could be a reward for Mark McKenzie. I don't know what it is, but that's something that I've bookmarked sort of mentally as we go through this tournament because we talked about it so much leading in. And I do think against better teams, there's a chance, although I'm still mostly anti-back three, there's a chance that is a workable look for the U.S. So maybe we'll see that on Thursday. I don't expect that we will, especially because Pochettino has gone with that back four that shifts into a three-back in possession via one of the fullbacks in almost all of his games so far since he took over last fall. But maybe we'll see it, and that's something I'm watching out for.
Yeah. Graham, my last question for you is about sort of the overall perception of this US team at this point. I think it was just over 12,500 who were at PayPal Park for this game, an 18,000 capacity stadium. So the US in a US hosted tournament not selling out its stadiums, I suppose, is a storyline in itself. But the US is the second favourite to win this tournament, 27.1% chance according to the Opta supercomputer, 30.1 for Mexico, who obviously opened their campaign with a 3-2 win over the Dominican Republic. But a few more wins, Graham, like this, and maybe a Gold Cup trophy lift at the end of this process. Do you think that helps with the overall perception of this team? Do we think that helps the build-up towards the World Cup and just sort of lifts the spirits a little bit, generally speaking? Maybe a few more butts on seats.
Yeah, a few more wins like this certainly would, because a few more wins like this would take them deep into the knockout rounds, and if they're blowing away teams 5-0, then yeah, that would change perception. But I take the broad point that you're making. I think if the US come out of this camp or out of this tournament with 3 or 4 players that you could look at and say those players are likely starters for the US at the World Cup. And again, we're still a long way out from the World Cup. There's time and scope for things to change pretty dramatically. But if that was the scenario, if the US make a deep run and come out of it with that outcome, then I think that would be a positive tournament. And I said it at the top of the show, one of the biggest positives out of this game was, and look, I don't know how to quantify this, but I am convinced it's an important factor. The discussion has moved on. Like the discussion we've talked for 50 minutes about individual performers that played well in this game. We're not talking about Christian Pulisic and Mauricio Pochettino and the players that aren't here. Like, it feels like this game has finally put a bookend on that discussion. And I do think that matters, because it must grind you down if you're a player in this team. So there's some positivity around the camp. There's some building blocks that we've established in terms of the approach of this team, and so hopefully this is a bit of a clean slate for this side with the rest of the summer.
Yeah, Graham. So. Chris Richards said after this game, quote, "If we can continue to win, I think that's how you shut people up, is by winning." And I think that totally sums all this up. Again, that was from Sanjay's piece. Yeah, that's how you do it. And we saw some real barbs. I think we referenced it in the open. We saw some real barbs from Pochettino where he said, like, I'm not a mannequin, basically talking about how he's going to make decisions involving players. He sort of clapped back quite extensively at Christian Pulisic over, that would have been Saturday's press conference, I believe, where Pulisic had gone on Jimmy Conrad's show for CBS, who was also making a documentary about Christian Pulisic, and said about Pochettino not bringing him in for the friendlies when he had expressed that he wanted to come in for that, but not the full summer. He said, quote, "That's the coach's decision. I fully respect it. I didn't understand it, but it is what it is." And then Pochettino comes out and says, quote, "Players don't need to understand. Players need to listen and to stick with our plan. They cannot dictate the plan." He explained why he only wanted to be involved in 2 games and not the Gold Cup, and I respect that, Pochettino said. "I understand him, but I do need that he understands our direction. When I signed my contract with U.S. Soccer, I am the head coach. I am not a mannequin." I mean, this is good stuff as far as the narrative goes. This is juicy stuff, and that's why Tim Howard and Landon Donovan can't help themselves from wading into the waters, because it's good for podcast numbers, and they're smart enough people to know that. Pulisic's talking about how he's only talked with Pochettino one time on the phone. Like, there's a lot going on here, and Chris Richards, I do think, said it best. Like, if you win, you get all that noise to go away. I wanted to bring it up just because it is juicy, and I wanted to finish that thread. But I would be quite content if we were done with that entire storyline, and hopefully for the U.S. and for this group of players and for Christian Pulisic, yeah, that book is closed.
I like that mannequin quote. Maybe was he watching cable TV and he saw that 80s movie Mannequin? Maybe that's where he got that line from. It's a classic joke.
Yep.
You need to look it up.
Yep,
that's probably it. Yeah,
I'd say so. All right, very good. That is our review of the USMNT's opening victory in the Gold Cup. Stick with us on the feed later in the week. Of course, we'll have a review of the match against Saudi Arabia on Thursday and in Haiti on Sunday, and then as we go forward through the Gold Cup too. But for now, Joe Lowery, thank you very much indeed for your sound analysis.
Thanks, Ryan.
Graham Ruthven, pleasure as always, my good man.
Thank you, Ryan Bailey.
And thank you, the Mostest listener. We'll be back on the feed very shortly, but for now, bye!